Welcome to the final video in this short series that walks through different exam questions for the AQA GCSE course on the Normans. This lecture will study the historical environment, specifically focused on Wales and the Norman conquest. The question we are going to study is as follows: defense was the main reason for building castles as part of the Norman conquest. How far does a study of Wales and the Norman conquest support this statement? Explain your answer. You should refer to Wales and the Norman conquest and your contextual knowledge. The part of the question that is in italics will be what comes up in your exam. However, the statement will be different unless, of course, this prediction proves correct. Let's first examine the statement. The word defense is very important. It is the named reason for the question, and you can only receive a maximum of half marks if you do not refer to how castles were built for defense. The phrase "the main reason" is also very important because it suggests there were other reasons why castles were built. Let's now examine the second half of the question, which will be the same in your actual exam. It starts by asking how far does a study of Wales and the Norman conquest support this statement. The phrase "how far" requires you to arrive at a balanced answer, an ultimate judgment. The phrase Wales and the Norman conquest is interesting. It is not a Norman conquest of Wales, because the Normans were never fully able to conquer Wales. Therefore, your focus for discussion is going to be on the Anglo-Welsh border and southern Wales, where some colonization around castles did take place. Finally, it asks you to not only consider what you've learnt about Wales, but also your wider contextual knowledge. For the higher marks, use your contextual knowledge to compare the Norman conquest and Wales to the Norman conquest in parts of England. For example, in this question, you could compare how William used castles on the Welsh border to how they were used in Yorkshire. I am now going to give you 1 minute to identify the key reasons why the Normans built castles. I have identified 3 key reasons why the Normans built castles, including the named reason of defense. We will examine each of these reasons in turn. I am now going to give you 1 minute to consider these 2 questions. How important was defense on the Anglo-Welsh border? How important was it elsewhere in the country? For my paragraph on the use of castles as defense on the Welsh border, I have written the following: defense was the main purpose for castles, because the Normans had to protect themselves against the threat of the native population. In Wales, this was Welsh princes, who did not approve of Norman presence along the border and in South Wales. It was also defense against bandits, who would raid over the Anglo-Welsh border and use guerrilla tactics against the Normans. This is why William prioritized the marchers and appointed 3 trusted marcher lords that had the power to build castles without royal permission. This secured the border so that if Wales ever united under a single prince, as they had in the 1060s under Gruffydd ap Llywelyn, then it would be very difficult for them to gain territories on the English border. This paragraph starts by stating a clear reason why defense was important for protection. Note the phrase against the native population. This could be both Welsh and Saxon, as these castles sat on the border. I then give very specific evidence about the political nature of Wales, since the threat from Gruffydd ap Llywelyn was part of the living memory of the Welshmen, and also the common practice of banditry. This gives clear reasons why the Normans wanted to secure this border, or protect any settlements in South Wales. I have then finished the paragraph with a short comparison to elsewhere in England by writing the following. This is different elsewhere in England where castles were built to defend against Saxon rebellions, such as in troublesome regions like Yorkshire. This shows the issue of banditry was fairly unique to the Anglo-Welsh border, and the larger concern elsewhere was obedience from the Saxon population, not protection from thieves across a land border. I have made a brief reference to Yorkshire as another important region, so to show that wider contextual understanding. You now have 1 minute to consider the question, how important was a display of power in Wales or on the Anglo-Welsh border? How does this compare to elsewhere in the country? For this paragraph, I have written the following. The second most important reason why the Normans built castles was to display power and show off wealth. For example, Chepstow Castle has the Great Tower, which is a large keep that could impress the locals and act as an entertaining space to impress the Welsh aristocracy. Similarly, Hugh de Ranch as Marcher Lord to Chester used his insignia of a white wolf on a navy background and displayed this on his banners and castle walls. These symbols of power were designed to intimidate the local population. This meant they were more likely to pay their taxes and less likely to rebel. In this sense, the castles acted as deterrents, which is a form of defense. Other castles, like the famous White Tower in London, served to intimidate in a similar way. In this paragraph, I have made specific reference to Chepstow Castle and a structural feature, namely the Great Tower, to show how the Normans displayed their power. Furthermore, I have used the Hugh de Ranch example, since it shows how the Marcher lords decorated the castles to show off their own prestige. In the second half, I have linked this back to the main factor, since an impressive castle acts as a deterrent against attack, and compared this to the White Tower, more commonly known as the Tower of London. You now have 1 minute to consider how important trade was in Wales, or the Welsh border. Also, how does this compare to elsewhere in the country? For this paragraph, I have written the following. One long-term purpose for the castle was the establishment of trade. In Wales, towns grew up around Norman castles, such as Rhuddlan and Cardiff. Most castles were situated next to rivers, or a coastline to make trade by boat easier. This turned the castles into trading hubs, with some castles, like Cardiff, having their own mint to create money. This meant the local population became economically dependent on the Norman towns for trade, which increased taxes. However, this is not as important as defense, because if a region was in open rebellion against the Normans, then the castle gates would close and trade would cease. This purpose was similar in Wales to elsewhere in England, and it explains why now most market towns have the ruins of a castle. This paragraph makes clear that trade was an important long-term purpose for castles, and gives two clear examples of towns that grew as a result of the building of a castle. This is reinforced by the reference to a mint in Cardiff and the location of castles near rivers to make trade easier. In the second half of the paragraph, I do provide a counterargument to show why I believe defense was more important. I use cause and effect to achieve this, since if a town was ever placed under siege by rebels or Welsh enemies, then trade would stop and the castle would resume its primary purpose of defense. In the final sentence, I have also made clear how this is the case across England also. Now spend a minute considering the final question overall, which was the most important reason. I have written the following. In conclusion, defense was very important in order to protect the Normans against their many enemies. In Wales, this was rival princes and bandits, but elsewhere it was displaced Saxons. The Normans had to achieve a strong defense around their castle before they could use it as a trading hub or as a status symbol of Norman power. My conclusion ties up my argument in a few simple sentences. It reinforces my original argument about protection, and link this to the other two reasons of trade and a display of power. If time is short, you do not need to write a conclusion. It is rather better use of your time to develop your evaluation in your main paragraphs, as this can also show judgment for the higher marks. If you write a conclusion before you have written at least 2 developed paragraphs of evaluation, then the response is not likely to reach level 3, and so the conclusion becomes redundant. Put together, my response looks like this: 3 paragraphs and a short conclusion. This question is one you can prepare for ahead of time and practice, since you know that the topic is Wales. Tune into my other lectures to learn about different possible question stems and how to approach these. Thank you for watching. Tune into any of my other walk-through videos to help you develop your exam technique ahead of your GCSE exam.